Well, first of all, apologies for the glasses and the tape. My lower eyelid's getting into my eye. I'm having maybe to have an operation on that again now. So on the video, on the what we're going to show you when I was on television on Saturday, we actually used invisible surgery tape below the glasses that put on to try to disguise it. But it got worse. And so the choice is I either make the video now or I don't. And I'd rather make the video. Now, this video is about last Saturday's show on the Akua show. It actually was more than just climate change. It got into some politics. I didn't know that was going to happen, but I was very happy to take part. And really a theme's come up for me from it because of a conversation in the green room with the Labour chap, and he's an ex-Labour minister, and I've met ex-Lib Dem ministers, I've met ex-Labour ministers and so on. I've met Conservative political advisors and quite a lot. And I actually think what really I bring together now is ignorance and arrogance. And when you combine those two together, you've got something. And, you know, when I raised something in the green room, gently, as it were, to the Labour minister, he told me that, hold on here, I know what I'm talking about. That was a vice-chancellor of a university. And his degree, by the way, was in French. And somehow making him vice-chancellor gave him authority, and he had no idea who he was dealing with me. And then he said, well, maybe there's one scientist, there's that one scientist against the 99% consensus. No, I don't want to know. And that's ignorance, but it's also combined with arrogance. And so I'm actually going to analyse this video slightly differently now to show you where they're coming from, these people. And so it's interesting. So let's start the show, and I'll intervene as I normally do to dissect it, but with a particular theme on this ignorance and arrogance combined. Okay, let's get watching.
Good afternoon. If you just tuned in, welcome. Sinan Nicey's here, 22 minutes after 3 o'clock. And this is GB News. We are Britain's news channel. And it's time now for my roundtable discussion on climate change. And there are a few things that we need to discuss. So let's start by showing you the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship's recent discussion on climate policy. The Speaker made a number of points in a speech, including claims about the number of deaths in Europe caused by cold waves compared to heat waves. Let's take a listen.
You hear a lot about heat waves. Actually, we had a little bit of that yesterday. But we fear a lot of the heat waves. But remember, there's also cold waves. We need to have a sense of how much does this affect us. Well, if you look at Europe, we actually know this for all nations in Europe. Heat kills, absolutely. We estimate that more than 20,000 people die each year in Europe from excessive heat. But we're not well informed if we don't also tell people that every year coal kills, and it actually kills about 10 times as many. About 220,000 people die each and every year in Europe from cold.
Just for the record, I disagree with Lomberg because he accepts the claims about CO2 being, the big influence on the planet. He argues that the cure is worse than the bite for the cost, and he's totally correct on all he says on this. But I don't agree with his fundamental thing that there is a problem like this to begin with. So let's proceed on that basis that, I agree with him on the cure is worse than the bite, but I disagree with him that I do not accept the climate alarmism at all.
This was what was presented when comparing the number of people who died in the past 10 years from climate-related disasters compared to hundreds of years ago.
The number of people that die from climate-related disasters, so that's floods, drought, storms, and wildfires, we have pretty good data for this over the last 100 years. In the 1920s, almost 500,000 people on this planet died from these four disasters: floods, drought, storms, and wildfires, every year on average. It's dramatically dropped down. So the last 10 years, the average number of people dying from these climate-related disasters is 9,000. It's a reduction of more than 98%.
Okay, I can't help just adding a little bit to that, the world population in 1920 was 2 billion, whereas today in 2023 it was 8 billion. So per capita, we need to divide the 2023 figure of 9,000 by 4 to get the per capita figure. So equals just 2,250 or 99.55% reduction. I know it's a small point, but I can't help correcting figures.
So the Speaker for the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship also went on to discuss the cost versus benefits of net.
This was the benefit. The benefit is a substantial $4.5 trillion on average across the world, across the 21st century. That's a substantial amount of money. This is why climate change is a real problem. It's something that we should be aware of and think about how we fix smartly. Unfortunately, it turns out the cost is phenomenally larger. It's $27 trillion. That's about a quarter of global GDP each and every year throughout the 21st century.
That was the cost versus benefits of net zero policies. Well, joining me now is former Labour Minister Bill Rammell, former MP Simon Danczuk. I'm also joined by climate scientist Paul Burgess and also climate columnist at The Independent, Donncha McCarthy. Right, Donncha, we'll start with you.
Sure. Bjorn Lomborg is right.
He is.
A significant number of people die in Europe from cold every year. What he's absolutely untrue about is to say that climate campaigners don't talk about it. Insulate Britain actually put their freedom at stake when they staged in protest. What? To demand that the 30,000 people in Britain who die from cold every year should have their homes insulated, and so we tackle that. If you tackle cold, you tackle climate change at the same time. Why? Because a huge amount of fossil fuels are used to heat our leaky homes and cost us a fortune. So climate campaigners say that we should insulate our homes, cut our fossil fuels and save the lives from cold.
OK, but with global warming and the place is warming up a bit, you're less likely to need so much cold, as it were, or so much heat, as it were, to heat your home because the place is warming up. So that's got to be a slight benefit.
So what did Lomborg say to that? He said that what we should do, because what happens that's fine in Europe, but the vast majority of the world lives in Africa and Asia. And for example, in India, we're talking about temperatures over 50 degrees. What does Lomborg say? Provide everybody with air conditioning. Do you know how many people in India have air conditioning? 5%. Do you know how much it costs the ordinary Indian person to put air conditioning? A fortune, and would hammer their economics.
I agree with that last part. It would. They can't afford the air conditioning. Totally agree. You know, but the point I'll be making in a minute is that a huge amount of women actually in Africa, for example, die from cooking using dung and things, and very smoky, very filthy conditions where they breathe in the fumes and really die prematurely. That's a big problem. It's actually a significant amount of the world energy, actually, when you measure the percentages of what contributes from what source for world energy. So he's quite right on that point, while missing the bigger point. But here comes the biggie coming up. It's about the cost of renewables.
I'm sorry there, but if you're going to look at Africa, let's take Africa, because you covered a lot of subjects there. We are depriving Africa of using fossil fuels. You won't loan the money to build fossil fuels. And now they're having to use dung, you know, to heat and so on. What the left are doing, and what the climate alarmism is doing, is actually making the people of Africa poorer. And it's actually the opposite. In this country...
Paul, hang on, let him finish, because we didn't interrupt you.
In this country, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, has been on air stating it's going to cost hundreds of billions. That's what the Labour Party say. And then he says, but don't worry, we'll get private industry to pay it. As if no one's got to pay them back. As if somehow they're going to do it for charity. That's the ridiculous situation we're in.
Let's go to Bill Rammell.
Sure.
Well, look, I agree with Lomborg that you need to tackle both extreme cold and extreme heat.
So what you're going to see now on the point he's about to make, and I want to warn you in advance so you understand it, is based on ignorance and arrogance. And it's this. He has just been presented with evidence about the reducing deaths due to climate. He's been faced with evidence of the costs, the enormous costs. So he's been given 2 or 3 episodes from that video of Lomborg's of evidence that Nana's presented to him. But does he discuss those? No. He goes for the person. He goes ad hominem. He does. He just goes straight for the person on something that the discussion can't go anywhere on. And this is what they do. They just ignore evidence. The thing they cannot argue about is evidence, right? they'll always go off. And normally that involves some sort of personal attack. And you're going to observe it now. And I do find him arrogant, and I do find him ignorant. And it just drives me crazy that these people have been in positions of power. It really, really does.
But I've got a real problem with him being quoted as an expert on these issues. He's been widely discredited for using questionable numbers. For
But you just said you agree with him. So if you're
on that
agreeing what
particular point, but I don't agree with his underlying research base. You know,
but he's come to the same conclusion as you.
He's been accused of scientific misconduct by selectively quoting other sources of research and misrepresenting them. That's not someone we should have confidence in.
I don't really think that's
an ad hominem attack.
That's not
that's a
fair. I don't
personal
think
attack.
that's a
The science shouldn't be involved in that. Science shouldn't be involved in who the person is and what. I could start quoting John Clauser, the Nobel Prize winner. I start my talks when I'm giving a talk, saying, look at that, he's saying it's all a bag of rubbish, all this alarmism. And then I say, it doesn't mean a thing. What matters is the evidence he produces.
Exactly.
And that is all that matters, is evidence.
If your evidence is flawed and your research is misrepresenting the reality, that's a real problem.
But you could say that about the whole CO2 thing, because that feels like the evidence is slightly flawed. I want to bring Simon Brown to
Bloomberg is right.
I'll come to you in a minute.
This where politicians play on this climate emergency, and this is the point he makes if you watch the whole piece. And I think that's completely wrong for politicians to do that. And it's been Conservatives as well as Labour, for that matter. What we really need, what the solution is nuclear more than anything. And every government over the last 20, 30 years has failed to address that in the United Kingdom. But what we've got now, and it really concerns me with Ed Miliband, is stopping drilling for oil and gas in the North Sea. I think it's a big disaster.
Absolutely.
I think that's the really wrong step.
Jonathan McCarthy.
You talked about us the cost of energy
referring to Paul.
in Africa, Paul, yeah. The International Energy Agency very clearly stated that renewables are the cheapest energy for Africa. Energy and storage.
So he claims that renewables, wind and solar, are the cheapest ones for Africa, energy and storage, because they're intermittent. Without the storage, it's meaningless. They haven't got the power. And there actually isn't any storage, as I'll be exposing now. There isn't any viable storage for them. It is absolutely ridiculous what he's claiming there. And, of course, the most expensive electricity in the world comes from the people with the most wind and solar per capita. So, if possible, my task now is to get into that storage. I'd love to get into every part of that. But if I can get into the storage and get him to expose what he means by storage, I can maybe destroy his argument.
And so what happened this week with Ed Miliband is really positive. For the last 10 years, the Tory government have been blocking and slowing down renewables and energy storage in the United Kingdom. So, for example, wind energy. The cheapest form of energy was banned. We were the only country in the world to ban it.
You can only make money from wind. You can only make money from wind, as we know, when the wind blows. And we are also struggling with storage.
What's the storage? What storage are you quoting?
Storage?
There is salt. There are salt batteries. There are water batteries. There are galaxy batteries. My home has been solar powered since 1998. My bills last year were minus 200, and for 9 months of the year I didn't bring a single kilowatt from the grid for heating or lighting.
Yeah, but
you've got a battery that stores overnight and for a week.
Let's be honest. You can afford solar panels.
Let's be
honest. Stop yourself there. You can afford solar panels. Okay, so it's prohibitive for most people. It's about 10 grand.
That's exactly right. This is a real class issue, actually. Yeah. Working people are being attacked by a Labour government. That's the irony of it.
Absolutely not.
Let me finish. Let him finish, because we listen to you and your solar panels.
Poorer people can't afford climate taxes to go on holiday. They can't afford solar power like you can. They can't afford higher energy bills. And it's a Labour government punishing working class people. That's the reality.
OK. So McCarthy quoted 3 batteries: water batteries, sand batteries, electric batteries. I'll take electric batteries first. Electric batteries in the UK, to cope with the 9 days without wind we had in 2018, and I take that as a simple example, it's not the worst, but taking that, you'd need 7,200 gigawatt hours. The cost of that, £3.5 trillion, maybe every 10 years. But it costs more than that, because if you put that demand on the world batteries, the price would rise, because there aren't enough materials to do this sort of thing. So that's out. Right, water batteries, what he means by that is pump storage. Well, again, that's in my background, as it were. There are 4 or 5 possible pump storage sites in the UK. We've got one at Norwich. When I was there and it was built, in my patch, I was the water resource engineer for it. When that was built, it was 9.1 gigawatt hours. Apparently now it's just past 10 at times if they can get the extra water. Let me compare to what you need. You need 7,200, and that's 10, because it does a different job. It's not there to balance the intermittency of major things like wind and solar. No. It's there for when you have a TV break, say in a big football match, and everyone rushes and puts the kettle on, and you need to suddenly increase it. So it allows a few gigawatts to be coming in seconds into the grid. That's what it's for. The biggest one planned in Britain or even talked about is 30 gigawatts. We need 7,200. So what he means by water battery, meaning pump storage, is completely out of the question. That's pure ignorance. Right, let's go on to sand batteries. Well, here's a sand battery. This is a 1 megawatt sand battery. Now, sand batteries are basically store heat in the sand. Let's put it that way, the cavities in the air and the sand. And then you take it out afterwards by running cold water through it or cold air through it and heating air or water. But they don't convert to electricity without enormous losses. So you've got these enormous losses. They're not really even viable for providing electricity, but they can be used maybe with some farm if you've got the land. Now this 1 megawatt one here, and they're now planning an 8 megawatt one this year, enormous size. But a single house uses about 14 megawatts of energy per year, right, to give you some perspective on this. So if you take 2 or 3 weeks supply for a single house, this is the size of instrument, the size of thing you'd have outside your house. And all it would do is provide the heat directly by pumping pipes through your house. It wouldn't provide the electricity because the losses in converting all that and the equipment put the cost out of reach. Totally not viable. Nor even if you wanted electricity and had all the extra enormous cost and losses, they're very slow to react. They can't give the immediacy of electric battery, which I've already said is out of the question. So, this is the sort of ridiculousness that world he lives in, and it's an arrogance because any sensible conversation discussing the engineering of any of these things he comes up with would be would expose it. I mean, there's no reason for him to be thinking this except he's part of a cult, in effect, part of a groupthink, bang bang bang, and that's what climate alarmists are. They're in a real groupthink. But there's 2 types. There's the type that gets caught in it and can't get out of it because the mortgage depends on it. And there's the other type that really believes in this nonsense.
We're not punishing working people.
Oh, yes, you are.
The risks from climate change in terms of
You're
food
doing the emergency
insecurity,
thing again.
in terms of drought, in terms of a whole host of issues,
To which we make no
and
difference
will
at all.
affect all of us.
Completely forgetting, of course, that all the costs, the hundreds of billions that we're going to be spending, apparently, to stop this risk makes no difference at all whatsoever to what he considers the risk, for we are negligible, and we're not stopping India and China who are ploughing ahead, and we're not stopping the continuing growth of CO2, even if we disappeared as an island, or Europe disappeared, North America and South America disappeared, the CO2 would still continue to grow. So the idea that we're doing this to avert a disaster is illogical. In addition, of course, he mentions droughts. Oh, we're subject to these increasing droughts. No, droughts are far less than the past. I've done lots of videos on this. And you know what? The IPCC agree with me that we've got no influence on droughts. We've got no influence on floods. All agree with me by the authority on this, the IPCC. So in their world even, they don't even know their own subject, these people. And this is ignorance with arrogance, because they don't want to listen. They simply want to pigeonhole you into some sort of world where you're a denialist and where you're always far right, you're always a racist, because that fits in with their agenda, not you.
But
no, it doesn't.
The green agenda actually creates jobs. Reputable international research says that if you double the use of renewables, you actually create a net 9 million jobs.
Biden has managed to work with Ford to create green jobs. Do you know how much it costs per job? $7.7 million. The next lot I looked at, $4.4 million per job. And the funny part is, those jobs were less than half the normal wage. This is a fallacy. The most expensive electricity in the world is Denmark to the consumer. The highest wind per capita, Denmark. The next one, Germany. Germany, the highest, next highest wind per capita, next highest, most expensive. Let me finish, and we're the third. I'm sorry, without the storage, you invent things like storage. I've worked it out. £3.5 trillion lasting 10 years, and have to spend it again for batteries. This is nonsense. You've got no physics or evidence to back that up.
You criticise Joe Biden. He's created tens of millions of jobs and has got an economic growth record.
Anybody can dig up all sorts of facts and figures about the cost of green jobs in America. But here we are. When considering the cost of £135,000 per green job in the federal stimulus bill, it's important to understand that these green jobs are temporary. President Obama's administration defines a green job as a job that lasts for 1 year. A stark example of the fleeting nature of green job creation is a solar power plant constructed in Arcadia, Florida last year. The largest of its kind in the country, the Arcadia project employed 400 workers during its peak construction, yet after completion there are a grand total of 2 full-time employees, with a price tag of $152 million. The green job subsidy is $380,000 per worker, even at the project's peak construction.
Give our right arm.
In what? Sorry, in terms of millions of jobs where? In anything? What's that got to do with climate?
Across the board.
What's the relevance to that?
Because it's been by a huge injection into green jobs and green industries.
Where we're all agreed, I think, and we should be agreed, is that the price of actually tackling the climate crisis should not fall on the poor. Yeah. And actually what's exciting about what Ed Miliband is doing is actually he's bringing cheaper energy. And what we should be doing, what they're also proposing...
We will see.
What they're also proposing, please don't laugh, that's a personal attack. Please don't laugh. That's a personal attack.
I find the hypocrisy here amazing. I've been on 2 previous shows with this gentleman, and in the first one I will show you what he did. He made a personal attack on me, and in the second one he actually called me far right, etc., and had to be stopped by Nana Akua. So direct personal attacks, very direct. I don't call me laughing at the point he made, it's the point I was laughing at. I don't call that a personal attack. However, just take a look at this.
But the other side increased by 30%. Look, you can't deny the fact that we now have more polar bears than we started since we started recording.
I haven't denied it. I actually said the numbers have increased because we stopped.
And what you're basing everything on, then is the scare story about CO2.
No, I'm not talking about
you are, because you're saying we've got to take action.
I didn't. The factual fact, whether you believe in climate science or not,
I believe in climate science.
95% of the world believe in the climate. Whether you believe
that is not true.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
Whether you believe in climate science or not, we have lost 70% of the ice, and that means
since when?
That is a threat.
Since when? Don't use statistics like that. Since when?
Bear population.
Since when have we lost 70% of the ice?
The reason I am trying to pin him down here is because I know the start date is 1979, but I need his end date, because if you're going to claim there's been a reduction between when and when, it's fundamental. And I also know, as I'll be showing you later, that, this is a total distortion of the facts. So that's what I was trying to pin him down to. But now I'm in the pinning to finish that pinning down off. He has to go for personal attacks.
We have lost 70 of the historical... since the historical period, since the 70s.
Since when? 1979?
Since the 70s. You can
you're cherry-picking statistics.
No, I'm actually checking...
everyone can look it up. All the records start in 1979. There they are.
Recognised as an erratic...
there they are.
Eccentric on this issue.
So that was just one of the personal attacks that Mr. McCartney made on me. In the other incident, when I met him, he accused me of being far right. And in both occasions, Nana had to stop him doing the personal attacks. So when I laughed at his point, not at him, but at the point he made, which was silly, right, that is not a personal attack. So if you analyse this, these 2 alarmists were given a video. The video showed decreasing poverty, it showed much better quality of life for everybody, and it showed above all that the cost of curing what they think is a problem is far, far greater than any gain from it. Hence, I highlighted that this Labour government, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, thinks that it's going to cost hundreds of billions. So I highlight the costs to say, basically, I'm agreeing with the video. The costs are far too high. Do they deal with that? Does the Labour man deny that? No. goes off subject and says, more or less, I agree with you, and then let's attack him personally. And that's what they always do. They did not at any time deal with the evidence, except to broadly agree. The first one, that's the Labour chap, he just said some mysterious authority had said that this particular speaker, is off track. He's got no scientific background. He's been caught out for this from this magic authority in the ether somewhere. And what did the second one do? What did the second one do? He did exactly the same. He appeals again to an external authority, as if somehow, besides raising a lot of very silly points. So what they do all the time is avoid the evidence in front of them, and they just discuss off subject, because it's the only way they can survive. The truth is, they are both extremely ignorant about the science, and secondly, in fact, they don't even understand science, and secondly, they're arrogant, because they really do think they know it, and they don't.
It's not
what's also
rich from you.
They are talking about abolishing the poll tax on electricity bills, i.e. the standing charge. The standing charge means that poor people pay more per kilowatt hour than the rich. And that's a really positive thing.
That's a good positive thing, but let's be honest, heat pumps, extremely expensive.
Agreed.
Solar panels, extremely expensive. Hold on. Wind, extremely expensive.
No.
Yes, well, you've got to...
No.
And also, let's talk about the actual wind turbines as well. They only last about 15 years. Where do you get them from? China. Thank you very much. Dr. McCarthy, brilliant to talk to you. Exactly, that's the point. OK, Labour Minister, former Labour Minister Bill Rammell, former MP Simon Danchuk, climate scientist Paul Burgess, and also the climate columnist at The Independent, Dr. McCarthy. Thank you so much. Right, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is...